Aleksander Kutela i Jovan Protisz, bardzo dziękujemy. Ja muszę się odnieść do tych trzech kółek. Zasięg, uwaga, zaufanie. Bo chcę podkreślić, że moim zdaniem to na początku pierwsze to jest zaufanie. Dopiero resztę, co pokazują nie tylko właśnie takie portale jak Onet, budując poprzez swoje gwiazdy, dziennikarzy zaufanie i eliminację tego, o czym mówił Jovan Protisz, 3 razy nie dla pewnych rzeczy, ale też pokazują influencerzy, którzy mają marki własne i budują swój brand w oparciu o własną społeczność.
Oczywiście, zobacz, nawet mamy doświadczenie z tak zwanym pojęciem osób zaufania publicznego chociażby.
Wiesz, no, dziennikarstwo też było, jest zawodem zaufania publicznego, tak? Wiesz, co się stało w ciągu ostatnich 10 lat, jakie podziały, ale o tym nie będziemy dzisiaj rozmawiać.
O tym może nie mówmy.
Dobrze, ale będziemy o tym rozmawiać, co w ogóle jest uwagą i o tym powie nam już za chwileczkę profesor Karen Nelson-Field, prosto z Australii.
Hello, Karen. Do you hear us?
Hello. I can. Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Hello. Nice to see you.
Nice to hear you. I think you are one of the most catchy person right now. I've seen you on the Mexico a few days ago with a presentation about attention. Is it from your perspective the hottest topic of 2020?
It is. It's probably been a bit longer than that. I think the hottest topic of 2020 is applied attention. So, there's been plenty of studies, and I didn't quite understand the language, but I'm guessing you just showed a whole lot of work around the proof points for attention. I mean, it's not hard to believe if someone's not paying attention, then an ad can't have an impact. But certainly this year, it has risen in terms of its profile, and advertisers are starting to kind of understand the importance of it and the lack of it in some platforms. So yes, is your answer.
Right. Karen, it's really nice to have you with us today, and thank you for joining us. And we can't wait to hear what the attention is. Could you explain?
Can't wait to hear, beg your pardon, what is?
Yeah, could you explain to us what the attention is? Because we are talking about attention.
Well, if you can see my screen, I will give you an actual application. This is our defined moment. So we talk about attention being defined as concentrating awareness, even if momentarily, even if small, even if fleeting, towards a reduced number of stimuli in our environment while ignoring other stuff. So in the context of advertising, that kind of means that, when a viewer looks directly at your ad, even if only for a few seconds, and ignores the clutter around them, then and generally life's distraction, then that's attention. So that's how we define it. Do we understand people's brainwaves and what they're thinking? Pretty much no, certainly not on scale. But what we know is that, even if there is some concentrated eyes on screen for a relatively short amount of time, I mean, the longer the better, then the ad will have some sort of business impact. It sounds easy, but getting consumers to ignore the clutter is actually quite difficult. We're all often very distracted.
Okay, so Karen, the virtual stage is yours.
The stage is mine. Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to the new world of presenting from the other side of the world. So look, just sort of extending from that, this morning for me is a presentation in 2 parts. So I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but I actually have written a book called The Attention Economy and How Media Works recently. So I wanted to kind of talk you through the concept of attention. I mean, everybody wants to understand how we define it, but also, what it really means for marketers. I've got some new findings to show you. But the second part of the presentation is a little bit more, as I said, about applications. So, there's been a lot of conversations about, attention becoming a measurement norm in the future. But I feel like the time is coming where there is change on the horizon. And as an industry, we are looking for something different. So if I may continue, I'll go back to my my description. So again, advertising attention is essentially defined as people looking at a screen even for a few seconds and ignoring the clutter. But what we find is that really, really hard to do. We actually see in our data that people switch in and out of attention, and it's actually quite hard to get undivided and sustained attention. And I heard you say social dilemma. So, there's a lot of, clutter in feeds that sort of, is designed to keep you interested, but actually in a lot of the cases, it keeps you distracted to other parts away from advertising as well. So moving right along, I think advertisers that are listening, if you learn one thing, attention in the age of distraction is not actually the undivided and sustained version that marketers idealized. We live in a very busy world. We live in overload with finite mental capacity. And to be honest, this is not a new concept, but we filter most things out and let some things in. It's called satisficing, which means that, we only bring in information that's relevant, and I'll give you some trigger examples in a minute. But we kind of live in this perpetual state of, I call it zombie, but essentially it's subconsciousness where, you can get from A to B and you forget how you got there, and that's just the way that our brains are. We're very, very busy. So what that means for advertisers is that, we switch in and out of viewing. So sometimes we look directly at the ads. Sometimes we're looking at our feed and we're making messenger, or comments or likes on other things. Sometimes we're not looking at all. So what you'll find in advertising, and particularly given advertising is not high priority, let's face it, most marketers have the wrong notion of human attention to advertising. It's not that, a brilliant ad will just sustain your attention for a long period of time. But as I said, what does actually help, and this is well entrenched in the literature, this is not my work, are these things called guidance triggers. And these are the things that can jumpstart these peaks of attention, even if momentarily, which is what we described. And there are two types. There are top-down triggers, which are about relevance and personal interest. And that's why targeting and personalized content is really something that a lot of advertisers do, because personal relevance does make you stop and pay attention. If you were in the market to buy a car, you're going to likely buy and notice all the ads that are on the television for car ads, or notice the types of cars that are on the street even. So you do stop and pay attention when there's relevance. But perhaps from an advertising perspective, the easiest one for us to deliver en masse is these things called bottom-up triggers, which is essentially this whole concept of unexpectedness. So it's when something triggers automatic and unintended attention. And we see that from some literature that, in fact, a professor out of Australia talks about, and he's got a whole book on this thing called Unexpectedness. I highly recommend it. But he talks about the notion that if you ever want to truly and completely grab someone's attention, then you must break their prediction. This is when a prediction fails, the brain becomes primed to take on new information. So, in the context of advertising, I often use this example. So this is what I would call creative unexpectedness. So on the left is the new Colonel Sanders, on the right is what you expect. So you don't expect Colonel Sanders to look like that. So this ad, in fact, won some awards and has definitely the whole theme is actually a global theme, that, the new Colonel Sanders. So that's a great example of that. We also see, and I've written a previous book on this, but even our more recent data, we see that emotion is an unexpectedness trigger. And I think that's not new news anymore, but what we see that if something's particularly shocking or in the positive, so if something's particularly highly emotive in a positive way, like sentimental, I mean, there's no more year. How many times have you been in tears this year from some sort of ad that renders, nurturing or togetherness or high levels of emotion. So we definitely see that high arousal content drives more attention and brand choice than low arousal content, which is kind of typically what ads are. It's hard to have an ad that's highly emotional for the whole period, but there are some triggers that you can use to bring in. And koala's probably a really great example of some of the ads here in Australia. You put a koala in an ad and someone's going to watch. The other thing we see is sound is a trigger. So again, it's unexpected if you are in a room and a loud ad comes on, or the opposite. In fact, the professor Jared from Melbourne actually talks about how he talks about it in the context of learning. So he says, you know, if a teacher goes in a room and all the kids are playing up and the teacher just stands there and says nothing, that's not, so no sound at all. That's in that context unexpected. So it will break their prediction and cause the students to pay attention. Unfortunately, it's probably the opposite in our game, that we see that, you know, more high sound ads play a role in the attention trigger than no sound at all. So some good news is that we actually see that even passive attention does play a role, nowhere near as strong as active attention. So active attention is when, in fact, I might just jump to this slide first. So we're also a technology business, so I won't go into that in detail, but the way that we collect data is that active attention is, you know, if you're looking at your mobile and you're literally, it's eyes on ad attention. Passive attention is when you're looking around the ad, sort of close to it, but not directly at it. And non-attention is when you're not looking at all. And that makes sense. So what we can see is that that active attention has the strongest relationship with uplift. But at the end of the day, active attention accounts for the greatest variation in these brand outcomes that we see. And we use short-term advertising strength as an indicator of sales. And I'll explain that in a minute. So what I will say is if no attention is paid, then you can expect no impact from the ad. And I to this day struggle with why people find that hard to believe. So I find it hard to believe that people find that hard to believe. If there's no attention paid, then an ad will have no effect on business outcomes. I mean, and in its basic form, we can see that in our data. So when we do baselines where there's no view, we see that the stats uplift from 100 to an index of up to 160. I mean, this is just a sample of data. This is just descriptive. But what we see is that if there is no attention, then an ad cannot have an impact. So active attention drives the most sales uplift. No attention drives none. Again, I feel like there's 1,000 studies out there that show the same thing. So whether you're using stats, whether you're using brand uplift, whether you're using real sales, whether you're using message takeout, you know, without it being seen or heard, there can't be an impact. So that's what the power of attention. Unfortunately, it's rare and certainly very valuable and precious. So just for marketers or creatives in the room, even when attention is present, so even if someone's paying attention, if the brand is missing, we fill in the blanks. And the attention you work so hard for is wasted. What we see quite clearly in our data is that, you know, when there's a brand present at the point of an attention peak, the sales uplift is greater. And I think, again, that is makes completely normal sense. But, you know, the reality is that most creatives don't want to spoil high attention moments. So if you've got an ad that's, you know, got a koala or got something in it that's really emotive, or the sound is loud, or there's a music coming to a point, most creatives won't want to spoil that attention moment. But the reality is that sales are amplified when attention peaks and branding are aligned. And again, we're not the only ones to find that knowledge. So it's really important that you understand that if you don't put the brand against attention peaks, when you do get attention, it's likely that viewer will misattribute that ad for your larger competitor. It's a double jeopardy effect. So we often say that good branding is grossly underrated. And this is why attention and memory are not the same thing. And this is also why, you know, it's hard to find a perfectly linear causal relationship between attention and actual sales, because at the end of the day, creative makes a big difference. Memory plays a role. You know, there's also things like physical availability, price points, competitor. So attention and memory are definitely related, but attention and sales are related, but we often say they're like cousins rather than direct siblings. So there's definitely a relationship there, and you can see one is related to the other, but not perfectly. What we also see, though, is that when branding is good, attention and decay and ad decay are related. So the more attention paid, the longer a brand stays in memory. And again, I often think that this isn't really groundbreaking. If someone does pay more attentive seconds, it's more likely that the brand will stay in memory for longer. And we can see this in multiple countries across multiple sets of data. So again, it sort of shows why people underrate the importance of eyes on ads. So we can see that each attentive second on average leads to about 3 days in memory. So, and then that depends on the platform as well, but you're doing quite well if you get some attention. What I will say is that all visibility elements impact attention, and we can see that this varies significantly by platform and format. And when I mean visibility, I talk about visibility in the context of pixels, which is the MRC viewability standard, so 50% pixels on screen. Coverage we also talk about. So coverage for us is, I know it might be a different term there, but for us it means the proportion of the screen that the ad covers. So pixels is about the proportion of the ad that's on screen, because people scroll, whereas coverage is how much of the actual ad how much of the screen the ad is covered. So that kind of relates to clutter that sits around it. So we definitely see that pixels and coverage and time relate to attention, and we've shown that many, many times over. So speaking of time, a blunt reminder that 2 seconds of attention is not enough. So we know that eyes on ad are important, but the longer the better as well. So definitely time is an important factor. And our data, what this is saying is that our data is showing conclusively that there's a difference between ad impact above 2 seconds and an ad impact below 2 seconds. And the importance of this set of data, which I think is about 11 data points, is that I didn't want to reveal which platforms these were, but this is across multiple platforms. This is across 3 countries and about 11 sets of data. So the reality is, if you go away with this slide shows that more attention is better for ad impact, or any impact of, whether it's sales, whether it's memory, whether it's whatever it is, than under. So again, I think that this is probably not overly surprising. There are many other studies other than ours that talk about viewing or time spent viewing being an important factor. But with that said, we collect in our technology, we actually collect human attention. So what happens is, and I haven't kind of gone into any detail here, but with the tech, we have passively collected text. So we actually can intercept the camera on a mobile phone while you're in. It's ethically done. So we have an opt-in panel, but we can actually intercept the camera on a device, and in the case of TV we have a device in front of the television, so it's actually filming someone and it transposes facial footage and gaze tracking to an attention score. But my point was, because we actually collect human attention, not simply whether an ad is in view, we can actually see that even if it's viewable technically, it doesn't always mean it's looked at. In fact, we see that on average across all of our sets of data, that about 50% of an ad, or of a time in view, has someone actually looking at the ad. So, put it another way, that, if duration's used as an impression proxy, it actually tells us a little of whether it's someone physically has seen it. So we say that time in view can equally mean viewer distractions. So attention's a funny thing. We've tried as an industry to look at proxies to kind of, I guess, emulate human attention and try and collect it, but it doesn't work as well as people think. And that's a classic problem with our OTS system, that even if you're being charged for a 30-second ad or 10-second ad even, it's probably half of that in terms of what people are seeing. So with all of that, and, you know, I love to talk about this stuff. So we have lots of other findings. If anyone is interested, please either get a book or email me. I'd love to talk about it. But I think it's kind of time for me to kind of move on the conversation. So again, so many people have proven the value of attention, so many different business cases, different methodologies, different parts of the world, different technologies. And, you know, I've been at Demexco and Cannes and, you know, South by and CES and all of those. But at the end of the day, it's time to move on from the conversation that it's important to one that is about action. So, you know, we've been talking about it as valuable metric for a while, and we as researchers understand its basic form, but we're officially switching sides today. So I wanted to quickly take you through the type of application that we have built, and this is getting quite significant gaining quite significant traction globally. So we think the market is ripe for change, and that's very exciting for us all. So just to quickly go through it again. You know, I've already reported this to you. I mean, in summary, what we've seen, and, you know, I've been researching this particular topic for probably 5 to 6 years now. What I will tell you is that not all opportunities to see are created equal. And in a lot of the work that I've printed, most people will understand what I mean, that, you know, an OTS on one platform is not the same as an OTS on another. And the sad thing is there's no transparency around this truth. We know it's not a regulated game. I get that, but proxies don't cut it. So proxy measures don't cut it, and the CPM that we pay doesn't account for performance difference. So, you know, if you pay $10 per thousand on one platform and $20 per thousand on this platform, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is twice the value or this is half the value. So CPM does not account for that performance difference. So what that means is that value, we don't understand what value is. That's the biggest problem in our industry. And the best we have is OTS or CPM, and neither of them are effective. So advertisers don't get what they pay for. Many ads play out with little or no effect, and, you know, the value disappears. So given that we're researchers, and, you know, we're always learning, we've been on a big co-design journey this year. So for the last about 9 months, we have been talking with our current customers and some of our other stakeholders, platforms, future customers. We wanted to understand how can human attention be used to correct the market. We did a fairly large piece of work during the middle of the year with WARC. So if anyone has access to the WARC database, there was a Planning for Attention special edition. So there's a lot of work in there about how some brands are trying to use attention to correct the market, but we went out separately and did a big piece of work on it. And the overwhelming thing, and I did see in your slides that you had a Venn diagram or 3 circles, but quite frankly, I couldn't understand whether you've already said this. But the overwhelming thing that people are saying to us is that attention is a missing quality layer, right? And it's kind of, they need attention to understand how reach and cost fits in together. That without a doubt was the overwhelming response. So, you know, it made me think about this funny little thing called unit pricing. I'm sure you have it in your country. I know in the 70s it was adopted in Europe, UK, USA. We're late bloomers in Australia, so it wasn't adopted in Australia until the 90s. But essentially it made me think about this concept of unit pricing, which is essentially introduced to help customers quickly compare products of different sizes to understand relative value of similar but not exactly the same products. So you go into a store, you can see there are 3 different cans. They all have different, you know, prices, but you don't understand what you're getting for your money. So unit pricing is a labeling system that essentially it looks at a single unit of trade to kind of reference the cost back to. And in this case, you can see that it's all costed back to the litre. So it's about informing the customer so they can make their own choice when they go and buy their cans of whatever they're buying. It's about value for money without having to do complicated calculations. So when I was thinking about what our customers and what the industry was telling me, I think that was the original intent of Opportunity to See, because, 30 years ago, when not so much, let's say go 20, an Opportunity C was that unit price, was that standardized measure, but the lack of definition around the term makes an OTS really difficult and impossible to compare. So we have built, and some of my colleagues and all those that are connected to the Attention Council will agree that attention is a value layer, but we've built a tool that essentially shows customers or shows media planners how they can buy media against this unit. So we've built a planning tool on the same principles, and the principles of unit pricing are, transparency, shifting the power back to the consumer, making complex data simple and easy, and in the most important part is deciding on a universal measure that's fitting of the category. So that unit of measure to us is eyes on ad attention. It's not a proxy, it's actual human attention. So, and I've said this many times that attention inherently reflects the differences across platforms. So if you've got a platform where people are scrolling really fast or distracted, then they'll pay less attention. If you've got a platform where there's no scrolling and, there's different creative that's really, or programming that's quite compelling, they'll pay more attention. That's as simple as it is. So attention does inherently reflect the modal differences across platforms. So using active attentive seconds as our weighting, what we've actually done quite simply is turned it into a AA CPM. So we've applied, how much do you pay per active attentive seconds? And then a customer can make a decision in their planning tools. So just to recap, this is active attention is eyes on ad. Passive attention is eyes nearby, but not directly on the ad, and non-attention is not looking at all. In the case of our TV data, and T-Vision in the US have a similar philosophy around this. It's non-attention for TV is when you're not in the room. For us, active attention is when you're looking at the TV, and passive attention is when you're on the couch but not looking directly at the TV. So in essence, this is how it works, without, kind of going into too much detail, but a planner will make some decisions around some filters. We're actually adding ad length in there as we speak. So, country. So we've got 3 or 4 sets of data at the moment. So US, UK, Australia, and Germany, that we've collected, that's big enough to go into a planning tool like this. And essentially a customer or media planner will pick a country, will choose an age group and the gender and potentially the category, and make some decisions around which platforms they might like to think about putting a campaign in. The CPM is then auto-filled back from the media planner, and essentially, to cut a long story short, this one to the far right sort of says, this is how many attentive seconds that particular format gets relative to that country, relative to that gender. And this is how much money per attentive second you're paying. So in a snapshot, it will tell you it's a value play, right? So it'll tell us in a snapshot, like unit pricing does, how much do you pay for a second of active attention? We also include some of our other data as well. So non-attention is really important as well. So, understanding of a 30-second ad that 20 seconds, for example, is not paid attention to at all is quite important. And that we also do have like a proportion piece as well. So understanding how much attention relative to the total length. And then this total attentive seconds is a combination of active, so that's a combination of eyes on screen and passive. And we can calculate the CPM against that as well. But the eyes on ad is what's important. And then what happens is, the media planner will make some decisions around what they want to compare. And between screen A and screen B, the second allocation page essentially weights, if you like, this value performance. So it assigns a spend proportion relative to the differences between the platforms. At the end of the day, we're not making recommendations on any platforms. This is actually not real data. So my job is not to influence a media planner in terms, because every platform plays a role in a campaign. I get all of that, but it just gives this value play. So for us, we think that this tool will help media planners understand the relative value cross-platform, make some informed decisions about the allocation, and potentially help with CPM negotiations in the future. So voila, that's quality layer made easy. At the moment, we've got a beta trial. If anyone is actually interested, it's free, and you can check it out on attentiontrace.com. But we've got a free beta trial, and we're happy for people to give us feedback, because at the end of the day, my goal is about continued co-design. My goal is about making sure that we build some tools that the industry are looking for in a ethically sourced way in terms of our attention. So that's kind of me for tonight. I love this quote because if anyone knows Elvis Presley, he sings this song, which is a little less conversation, a little more action. So that's what we're doing. We're saying enough. We're going to change the line in the sand. We're going to move attention from conversation into applied, and industry is changing, and that change is good. So thank you so much for having me. I could have spoken for 3 hours on this topic. I'm so jealous that you get to spend the rest of the day talking about it.
Thank you, Karen, for your speech, but it is not the end. Stay with us for a minute, because we've got a question for our audience, so we would like to ask you something.
There's one question I'm going to write down. Walled garden versus open web. Which ecosystem is closer to attract people's attention?
Which ecosystem is... What's the question? Which ecosystem?
Closer to attract people's attention. Walled garden versus open web.
Well, I think you're really talking, I probably don't want to be that person to promote one platform over another. But what I see in that question is it's more about the device than so much the platform. So, if I think about, a web-based forum, most of the time that's, done on a PC, for example, whereas an app is, if you're talking about that is on a mobile. So often we'll see that mobile is actually paid more attention to than, for example, a PC. But also, at the end of the day, the socials, which I know is what you're alluding to, are genius at notifications, whereas web-based interfaces are not so much. They're a little bit less aggressive with tapping you on the shoulder to go back to them. So I think it's a combination of the device, and I think it's a combination of the genius of data that sits behind the walled gardens versus the platforms that are web-based. So, is that a good thing that, I know, again, you mentioned social dilemma. Is it a good thing that they are genius at getting your attention? I think there's an ethical play around quality, but I think that's a bigger discussion than this one.
Okay, thank you so much for answering that question. I think we should all focus on what you've said, moving from conversation into actions, regardless of platforms. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. Stay safe and goodbye. Have a nice day.